Hi, I'm Irwin Lazar, President and Principal Analyst at Metrigy, and I'm excited to have with us today Judith Hogan, Senior Director of Sales Acceleration in the EMEA region for Poly. We will spend a few minutes here talking about what we're seeing in terms of how organizations are supporting hybrid work and what the persona and device strategy is that makes sense. So before we hop into the questions, Judith, welcome, and why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do at Poly?
Hi, thanks. Hi, Owen. Great to meet you. Yeah, my role is really a sort of sales go-to-market. We overlay the EMEA region and sort of drive the focus in voice, video, and enterprise in terms of how we approach the market. I've worked at Poly for 14 years now, so I've been in the industry for quite a long time. Prior to that, in other sort of tech companies, so always in sales.
Excellent. Well, welcome. I'm excited to have the opportunity to chat with you, and it's certainly an important topic. Just came out of the Enterprise Connect show last week here in the United States, and hybrid work and supporting hybrid work was certainly a critical, if not the central theme of the event. So let me ask you the first question. As organizations think about supporting a hybrid environment, why do they need to pay attention to work style?
I think it's much more important since we've moved to sort of hybrid ways of working, and certainly the last 2 or 3 years it was enforced. But if you think of how we used to work, most people had a sort of fixed desk. They had everything sort of on the desk, their tools, or they went into the meeting room. Suddenly, when you're not in that controlled environment, shall we call it, that sort of fixed location that's designed for work. Suddenly, if you need to work from anywhere, there are all sorts of other things that come into play. And I know over the last few years, we've had people with their children on their knees, working in the house, trying to have a conversation in the kitchen whilst perhaps somebody else is cooking dinner or making a coffee or things like that. So suddenly all these other things come into play. And I think the other thing is, things like video fatigue. We suddenly started to hear all these new things that are happening, and that's really based on the fact that people are working in a hybrid way. They're working in different places, and so they have different technology and different tools, and sometimes not always the right tools. So suddenly there's a huge focus on what's required to enable them to work normally and effectively and naturally, but with all sorts of different challenges, if you like.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I've been working from home now for about the last 17 years, and had a call actually with one of your colleagues at Poly yesterday, just as the landscapers showed up to mow the lawn, and fortunately had a noise canceling video bar from Poly, and it was able to, it distracted me. It certainly didn't distract the person at the other side. So definitely agree with that. So as you think about personas for remote workers and hybrid workers, what are you seeing today? How is it? How are businesses meeting the challenge of defining personas?
So, I think actually Polly did it for them. We did some, we started off doing some research probably originally about 10 years ago, and we've refreshed it twice since then. So I can sort of tell you the kind of personas that were defined, and then what the changes sort of meant really. So we ended up where we had, I think now 43% of people office based, about 34% flex or remote, and then sort of about 14% of executives. So pretty much covering about 91% of a typical enterprise. What we found, I think, interestingly, we did this research globally, were the personas were pretty much the same across the world. There weren't dramatic differences, but I think we refreshed this research last year, obviously just coming off the back of COVID. And it was quite interesting, the changes. So, it was about 7 points less people in the office. We sort of declined, which obviously would see that more people spending, it's not rocket science, more people spending time at home, more remote places, and then more shared spaces. So I think as companies are now starting to rationalize their office space and people are starting to go back, nobody has their own desk anymore, or very few people do. Very few people have their own office. So there's lots of how we can use those spaces effectively. I think we've also had some research where we started to look at, from both organisations and people, in terms of going back to the office and how they feel about it. And we're starting to find that, around people want to come back for about 3 days a week. But we start to look at then, um, whether somebody is a communicator, a collaborator, whether they're actually an office worker, whether they're flexible. One of the things that really declined was the road warrior, because nobody's really traveling anymore. I mean, that will start to perhaps build up a little bit more. Um, but certainly, I think the things that we need to look at is the need for increased communication and collaboration. That isn't just what was perhaps in the office corridor or the meeting room or from your desk. We're now having to do all of this remotely from a whole variety of locations. And I think that the focus there then is really very much on the tools that enable you to do that. And I'm not convinced businesses have really nailed that at the moment. When I join calls outside of my business, and perhaps join webinars, I see people using um, sort of personal collaboration, things that they use with their mobile phone. They're not using pro grade things. They're not using the right camera. And that starts to make meetings difficult. It takes away that sort of natural, that easy communication. It starts to make communication a challenge. And I think we've seen this now. Companies are starting to see that, and talk about hybrid work plans. It's interesting that you say Enterprise Connect. It was a big topic. I think it's massively important. But in terms of the things that we've looked at, um, I think this is going to be a really big watch out and a big issue for companies. 58% of companies have seen higher turnover in staff through the course of the pandemic. And quite a lot of this is coming back to how they've been forced to work, and not just hybrid working, but lots of people have loved the flexibility. And I think some companies are now trying to pull people back, but then there are equally a similar number of people who have hated the hybrid working. But I feel some of that is maybe they haven't had the tools to do that, so it's become very stressful.
Yeah, and you really hit on a good point about, there are lots of folks out there that are just using consumer grade devices, but then when they have a problem and they call into their tech desk or help desk, if their help desk can't manage those devices or can't see what's happening with them, they certainly can't support the hybrid work, and that probably leads to some of the frustration and increased turnover and so on if people aren't happy in the environment they're working in, right?
Absolutely, and yeah, was that they can't help them. So we're already stressed, and you come in and you can't be helped. And I think some companies gave people budget to go and source something for themselves. Some people controlled it a little bit more. Some people had to buy whatever they could get. So I think now we need to have a rationalization of what's out there and a clear plan and strategy for them to understand what's going forward. So Polly classified a range of personas and work styles, and what we do have is a survey tool that will allow companies to survey their staff, and identify how they work, how they're going to work, how they want to work, and the sort of tools that they like to use, things that they're comfortable with using. Because one size doesn't fit all, so you might have somebody who's the same persona, but they might want to choose slightly different options in terms of comfort and preference.
That makes sense. So that provides that tool that allows companies to match technology to the work style and environment.
Absolutely that. And I say at a range of whether it's good, better, best, or just different wearing styles, or different camera types, then to fit those needs. Absolutely. And I think that's something that the companies really need to pay attention to. I talked about this, the survey that we did recently, and I think less than half organizations are sort of fully prepared for the future of hybrid work. We got from that. A lot of them are still looking at this as a short-term thing. So that's quite scary, because I think hybrid working is here to stay. And whilst companies are sort of looking to rationalize real estate and look at more shared spaces and different ways of working, then people can't go back to how it was. So they need to have a strategy that allows people to work from anywhere, really.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. So we've heard a lot about hybrid workforce enabling a better work-life balance. Do you feel that supporting hybrid work is finally made work-life balance achievable, or what do you see as some of the challenges that may still remain?
I think it can do. I absolutely think it can do. I think it can be completely liberating, but then equally, I think it really depends on the company's approach and their attitude. And one of the key things that came out, and again years ago, Polly looked at smarter working. That's when we started looking at the personas. But one of the key things came out. We used to do open days because we had this smarter working office, and we used to sort of evangelize about hybrid working years. We've been doing this for years. But one of the key things, and we used to have companies who would come to our office and they would bring, sort of HR and facilities and things like that. We talk about the whole thing. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks was trust. So lots of companies are terrified that if they allow somebody to work from home and they give them some flexibility, how do I know that how do I know they're not at the gym all morning, or they're playing with the children, or they're and there's a huge thing, and I think companies who can't get their head around that, that's where the challenge is. And typically, what people do when they're given the opportunity to work, is quite often the other sort of factories, they work too hard, they can't stop. So I think the two things that companies need to address is to allow somebody to work productively, to give them trust, to measure outputs, and work in that way, and not to have a culture where people don't feel just because somebody has sent them an email at 10 o'clock at night, because that's when they're doing some work, that they have to reply to that. um,
I can't agree more. Again, I mentioned we're a virtual company. I've worked from home for about 17 years. The best piece of advice I ever got was from a former colleague who said, at quitting time, it's time to quit. Close the laptop. But then, that was pre age of iPhones and Android phones, where you are always connected. So it is. I think it's you mentioned that challenge of trusting workers not to work enough when they're working from home. I think it's the other way around, that people tend to work too much, or put in
Absolutely.
a lot of
Yeah.
extra hours
Yeah.
from my experience.
Yeah, and I think it's that, and then the other thing I think is sort of being able to manage the change in culture.
Hmm.
This virtual um, culture. So you're not sort of meeting by the coffee machine or in the corridor anymore. And sometimes you can forget to keep in touch with your team, and allow them to have that communication time. And then back to the tools is really having that natural communication, feeling comfortable, so you can hear and be heard. People aren't worried about perhaps noises in their home, or as you say, the gardener turns up. That shouldn't be a stress. You should just know that the tools you've got, you can be seen, you can see if you're dialing in remotely and other people are in the office. It feels quite natural. You feel a part of that meeting. That no, the video is very natural. You can see who's talking. You feel that you're part of that conversation, that you're sitting around the table. And that's where Polly have worked really hard to create that, to sort of bring that meeting equality. And I see that, that's another sort of stress. We talk about, again, the challenges of hybrid working. It can be very stressful if you are dialing in, and even if somebody's trusted you when you've got that work-life balance, then you dial into the office, but you don't feel a part of that. And you don't feel you can be seen or heard or sharing the conversation. Then it's, well, I may as well just go into the office.
Yeah, no, I agree. Meeting equality is certainly a big topic now, and I know we're seeing certainly pushed by some of the software vendors to address some of those issues. How what kind of technology are you seeing come into play that would allow? It used to be the scenario where if you were the one or two, you were among the one or two people at home dialed into a meeting, you didn't really know what was going on. But now, if you're at home, most people are probably at home, and the people who are in the meeting might not be able to see the chat, or have a good view of participants who are remote. So what are you seeing in terms of technology that would better support meeting equality?
So I think, things like tracking speaker framing, so you can see who's talking. I think from a perspective, things like acoustic fence. So people are within the zone where they don't hear any background noise. There's no other chatter. They can hear clearly. Also, perhaps if you're dialing in from home, that you have hybrid ANC, so you're only hearing. You can focus on what's happening in the meeting. You're only hearing what you should be hearing. There isn't anything else to distract you, so you can concentrate on that and be seen. And then we need to look at sort of natural looking videos. So so you can clearly be seen.
Excellent. So with that, any last best practice recommendations you'd like to share with our audience, and how can they get in touch with you if they have any additional questions?
So I think the key things are really consider the right tools. I think the investment far outweighs anything else. You make the investment in the right tools. People will want to stay with the organization. They'll feel a part of it. They'll be able to work more easily and effectively and be much more productive. So I think it's worth really realizing the value of that. And I think never before has this been so important. And companies still, I think, underestimate that. Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to get in touch with me or any of my acceleration team, I'm Judith.Hogan at poly.com. I'm more than happy to give advice on this or introduce a member of my team who can support.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your insights, and thank you to our audience for joining us. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this video, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Great to meet you.